Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is the end of one model to rule them all. Why enterprise AI is going small, specialized, and multi-model. I'm joined by Calvin Cooper, co-founder and COO of Neurometric AI. Welcome, Calvin.
Hey, great to be connected. I'm excited to dive in. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, I think this will be a fun conversation. It seems like it's one that's come up a lot lately, which that's a good thing. I guess people are starting to talk about alternatives to the large language model fallacy. So before we get going, though, you have a really interesting background, and I know you were venture capital at NCT Ventures, founded Rove, fintech company, through a Nasdaq exit. So you have some experience that some of us entrepreneurs never actually get to. Entrepreneurship at Ohio State, now co-founder Neurometric AI. So what did this journey look like through investing, building, exiting, and now really leading you to focus on inference time compute and small model orchestration?
Yeah, I've always just followed curiosities to their logical conclusion, and I can't just not do a thing. So, I started my career in early stage venture capital in the Midwest at NCT Ventures. So, helped raise Fund 2, brought in a few of the LPs, led deals across several thematic areas, and then went on to found Rove as the CEO, consumer fintech products. Sold it about 3 years ago with the plan to take the acquirer public via direct listing on the Nasdaq, which we did. And taking a look at the market with the venture hat on, like what's changing in technology, what's changing in consumer behavior, and where are the real new opportunities? What's in the adjacent possible? And it became very clear that Inference was going to be the largest technological market opportunity of our lifetime. And I met Rob, the CEO, founder of Neurometric last year. We all decided to go full-time in August at a time when the dominant narrative was still scale compute, scale larger models, AGI, and we were seeing something very different in academia and the research, and just reasoning to how do you build practical AI systems that scale in a cost-effective way and solve problems for enterprises. And so we started to investigate that.
Interesting. I mean, your tagline actually feels almost counter message to what we all sort of accept today, or we hear a lot today anyway. And that's the small models, specific jobs, pay for work done, not tokens. I mean, that's a bit of a challenge in a way to the prevailing narrative, right? Bigger models are always better. Can you break that down for us a bit? And what are you seeing in the enterprise market that convinced you this was the right path?
I mean, so what is being seen now is validation of a hypothesis from before, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of things become obvious when you just think critically. So they often say like contrarian thinking. I think people approach that the wrong way. Often they're thinking they want to be a devil's advocate, which is just the inverse of a dominant narrative. Yep. But if you just think about it critically, do you need to hire a surgeon to schedule an email for you? No, you're going to overpay for that. Why would you do that? That's just obvious, right? So if you think about AI systems similarly, why would any technology that knows all of world history and different aspects of science and has to navigate to answer a question, why would that be the most efficient way to answer a question or solve a problem? So that's just obvious. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave the PhDs to talk more about the technical limitations of that. And we publish a lot of stuff on our Substack, but it just becomes obvious that a smaller specialized model that's fine-tuned for a specific task is going to be faster, cheaper, and more accurate, right? So when you're going up against a dominant narrative that's well funded, right? A lot of people have shortcuts in their brain. They're like, how are you going to beat Anthropic or OpenAI? Mm-hmm. You have to think at the systems level. Like, you got to think about incentives, you got to think about the science, the trajectory, the adjacent possible. And then you got to figure out what's the smallest first thing you can do to start to prove the thesis and learn as well, because some things you're wrong about, right? And you expose that as quickly as possible. So you want to ship in a week or a month. So the first thing we shipped was our leaderboard, right? So we had to put up a leaderboard against CR Marina benchmark, which is a public benchmark Salesforce. Mm-hmm. And why CR Marina? It's because it was less academic and more useful for actual work, right? Right. And you can break down to the task level, like named entity disambiguation and such. And so what we showed is that different models perform better or worse at different tasks. There's no universal good model. And also often how you approach the model or different inference time tactics or algorithms paired with different models, those combinations can be as impactful or more than simple model choice, right? And so we started to show that, and then started to show how ensembles of models and different approaches and sometimes small language models can perform better. And so we started to prove that. And then a couple months later, signed a few early adopter customers, and then ran, they are on a journey that most people are, just get something to work at all costs. And then you start to scale, and then either, first issue and getting it to work, maybe latency requirements, meeting those. And then after that becomes price, right? So that's just obvious following, reason. And one example I can think of, they've got two models in production from different model providers. And then we ran analysis on dozens of different alternatives and showed where one of the Llama models could perform and meet the accuracy requirements and the performance requirements, but also do so at a 10x cost improvement and 4x latency improvement. So then now you're moving from hypothesis to data and research and publishing that to making an impact with a real customer.
Yeah, now that makes sense to me. I'll say eventually I came to this similar conclusion that sizing the language model to the task is actually the correct approach. But it's funny because I sort of took a circuitous route, I guess, but because for me it was a realization as I started to look at some really specialized functions that it just didn't make sense to have this large generic model when what I needed was something highly specialized and tuned to the exact either vertical or process or whatever, right? So I can see a lot of the argument as I looked through this and went through my own process over the last year. But I think a lot of people still, kind of accept that narrative that, oh, big is always better, right? And, when we were talking about this in our prep conversation, you said you started last summer that there was almost no awareness around GPU utilization or efficiency for inference compute. And this whole idea of consumption-based pricing even, leads to that. And the conversation's really shifted a lot this year. I mean, what changed, and what do you think CTOs and CIOs are telling you now about cost pressure that's really forcing them to rethink their model architecture?
I mean, many different things. I think one public article to read is there's one AT&T's chief data science or chief data officer was in VentureBeat a few weeks ago or a month or two ago. And he was interviewed talking about how as they scaled from 8 billion tokens a day, they had to, to 27 billion tokens a day. They had to really rethink their architecture and cut costs by 90%. Even as they scaled, right? So they cut costs by 90% as they went from 8 billion tokens a day to almost 30. And that's what changed, right? Last year, we even trying to understand if AI was going to make an impact. I think people who are closest to her are like, oh, yeah, it's obvious. But enterprises were failing to prove ROI on projects. And now you're starting to see real scaled implementations at the enterprise level that's driving impact. And when you move from cute pilot project to production that's making an impact and scaling, economics does the rest, right? And Jevons paradox applies here. And so your costs go from minuscule, negligible to first order concern priority. This is a problem that needs to be solved and can be solved, right? So to make it very tractable for our listeners, OpenClaw, if you're aware, came out. This 24/7 agentic runtime where it's not just an LLM chatbot. You have an agent that is running 24/7 is actually useful. And people who are vibe coding with Claude Code can even get up an agent in a virtual machine or a Mac Mini. And so let's say you're using it for content automation and meeting scheduling and something like that, right? And your costs are going from, tens of dollars to hundreds of dollars a month and more. And you don't know that because you're using your Claude Code subscription. But Anthropic knows it, and it's running up their bill. It's messing up their economics because they're subsidizing the cost that it takes to provide this intelligence to you with venture capital. And so they say, pump the brakes. You got to use the API, and we're going to charge you by the token. And all of a sudden, your project that is delivering value to your life and workflows as an OpenClaw instance now goes from your subscription payment to hundreds, thousands, $10,000 bill a month. It's $100,000 agent now, right? So you got to do what? Use orchestration and multiple models and Claude for advanced reasoning, but then task-specific small language models for certain things, or open source models that are cheaper, or things that are self-hosted. So you have to start to explore the whole framework differently. So it's just obvious that that's the next step. And I think our government's even finding that out. The DoD saga is important to watch.
Well, and over the last quarter or so, even the stock market fallout reactions to, particularly in the SaaS narrative of, the seat pricing model's dead and we have to go to value-based or we have to go to consumption-based. But a lot of pushback from the enterprise around, well, yeah, we need cost predictability and this doesn't lead there, right? So I get the reaction, but it does really lead down this path that you're talking about of, okay, let's think about how we size this to make sense in each of the process environments that we're really working towards, right? So that resonates. But in your marketplace, I know I saw like 115 task-specific small models, something like that. There was a large number, under 20 billion parameters, and they're all fine-tuned to a single job or specific job. Even some auto small language model creator that generates custom models on demand. I mean, can you talk a bit about how that works in practice? And, if I'm an enterprise team, what, with a with this specific workflow, what does the process look like to go from I have this problem to I'm ready to deploy this specialty model?
So this comes naturally from our last topic, right? So as you're seeking more cost predictability, right? That's the next shift. It's and even if you zoom out, it makes sense. Like think about text messages. You were paying per text, and you have unlimited text. Right. You have bandwidth, and now you have unlimited bandwidth and data, right? Similar with AI, the progression is towards predictability. And so we see that paradigm shifting, and we decided to ship a solution into the market priced that way. So you're paying a fixed monthly price per endpoint, right? Task specific model, job to be done. And then your fallback is to a larger language model, maybe a foundation model like provider like from Anthropic or OpenAI. And so when you blend the two, you have more price predictability. And so we decided to ship that into the market and then ship a solution into the OpenClaw ecosystem, Claude Pack. And we've got more coming soon that are going to, target coding problems and tasks. And so instantly we saw tons of people, and the timing was great because sometimes you don't want to be too early, but right as we were doing this, that was when Anthropic just so happened to ban the subscription use to OpenClaw users. So this isn't just useful for OpenClaw users. That's just one channel to ship into, and the timing worked out. But instantly you get a couple thousand API key requests. Then we're like, oh, let's turn on paid. And then you turn on paid, and then people just start paying you. And it's illustrative of what's possible. And so we're shipping into that prosumer alpha dev ecosystem, even as we're working directly with business customers that are early adopters. But proving that you can have a predictable cost around your agentic workflow solution.
I mean, it's an interesting argument that you guys have made around, I think it's like roughly 75% of enterprise AI tests don't really need a frontier model, or, with that depth of reasoning and honestly, the large consumption of tokens. But I mean, structured and repetitive, narrow tasks like classification, extraction, formatting, routing, summarization. I mean, how do you help companies figure out what tasks belong in the small territory or medium territory, and which ones really do need the big model, the frontier models?
Yeah, it's a heuristic, and I think Pareto's law applies here. And I mean, if we're honest about things, the vast majority of things that humans do, not humans, but like companies do, is you move away from ambiguity to things that are you can create SOPs around, right? And as you go from that ambiguity to more deterministic, more easier to eval, it's those things are things that are probably you can handle them with small language models.
One of the products that you guys have developed, you call the coding swarm, and it's a really interesting idea. And in fact, even some of the times when I vibe coded or play around with Claude Code, for example, it does spin up different agents to do different parts of the task, right? But your argument here is that instead of using the single frontier model, you orchestrate a coordinated team of task-specific small language models. Each one's trained for that specific part of the development lifecycle, testing, documentation, et cetera. And, what led you guys to think that way? And how does it compare to kind of what we see when you're just using Claude Code, generally to code a project?
I mean, I think that's just where the market's going. You're seeing that is the approach you have to take. uh, to get things done. So there's a profound shift happening. It's pretty incredible. And you mentioned that you're vibe coding. I think one of the biggest and sorry to take the question differently, but I think what's really interesting about what's happening with AI augmented code development is the broader conversation, and especially America, the fears that AI is going to take away our jobs. But the first best use case of AI that's proven to drive impact and scale is coding agents, right? And co-pilots and things like that. And not just co-pilots now, like swarms of agents that can write code, and you're now managing and overseeing those agents. And what happened to the software developers? Did they go away? No, they're in much higher demand. And companies that couldn't afford engineers now have software development capabilities in their organizations. It's expanded the jobs in that category significantly, and even made the people with the craftsmanship and as software developers or computer scientists even more valuable and sought after. And so I think that's just interesting.
I mean, it is really interesting, and I've argued for a bit that you're not really talking, at least at this stage, and I don't know what the future looks like, but for now, it seems like we're not really talking about we're going to replace this large group of people. In some cases we are changing their jobs somewhat. I mean, maybe a developer that used to spend all day coding spends an awful lot of time doing modeling and thinking of the outcome, the conceptual abstraction of what you want, right? Versus I wrote the code to do that. But I mean, that's still developer function, right? So in effect, we're not really saying, oh, look, this large swath of jobs is going to go away next month because of this, right? Which definitely is, but hopefully that's comforting to some people anyway. But if you think about maturity, and I've done a few maturity models around organizational maturity, around technical maturity when it comes to AI, agentic AI particularly. And you talk about a stage 4 maturity in enterprise AI, which is like a transition from treating AI as a monolithic service to starting to treat it as a dynamic resource where the right models match to the task. And a lot of companies are just not there, right? I mean, they're in much earlier phases. Well, what does the path look like? If I'm a stage 1 company, I'm just now starting to, experiment with this. What does it look like if I go from stage 1 to stage 4? And where are the pitfalls? Where do they often get stuck that you've seen anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think the commitment has to come from the top to see it through, right? So the failure mode is the mindset that the first KPI is to prove some kind of ROI. Now, the first KPI is to learn by doing. And so I think the first thing to level set on, and I do some work with a private equity firm called Pilot Wave, which is purpose-built for AI rollups, founded by Afshin Afshar, the former chief data science officer of JP Morgan. And the main gap is no longer is the technology capable. It's, do you have the expertise, the commitment to drive value, and that process of closing that gap. And so I'll kind of make it personal a little bit. Like I grew up in the Midwest in Columbus, Ohio, and started in the venture ecosystem there. And there's a lot of great things that happen. But I remember one thing that used to bother me a lot. And my instinct was that I need to go to San Francisco once a quarter. So I started to do that. And like you hear people say, oh, they can think that way because they have so much money to figure things out. And I'm like, no, maybe they have all the money because they think a certain way. Maybe we have it backwards. And one of the frameworks that's backwards is often that there's value to saying something won't work or that it's all hype. It's literally of no value to say that most of that will fail. Structurally, most venture deals fail. That's the venture capital portfolio construction model, right? Or to call a bubble seems like, oh, I called a bubble. This is a bubble. That is not intellectually interesting at all. Bubbles are the default mode. We always have bubbles. We had a railroad bubble, but that didn't mean that railroads weren't massively important, right? So calling a bubble is kind of like almost retarded. And so like when you look at crypto as an example, it's like, oh, crypto didn't have any use case. Well, it does. There's a multi-trillion-dollar market now, and just because it doesn't solve a problem for you in your country doesn't mean there isn't $100 billion a day in stablecoin transactions and making cross-border payments free almost. We hire engineers and the best way to pay them globally is with stable coins now. And so it's solving real problems. So similarly with AI, is the technological breakthrough real? Absolutely. Is there a new adjacent possible? 100%. If you can't figure out how to drive ROI, that's a you problem. So I think the first most important thing to answer this question is to change the frame of mind to experimenting. And what did you learn? Did you ship something useful? That's it, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just looking at history, it is very typical in tech, especially to call, oh, this is a bubble. This is really not real. There's, all these other issues or whatever, or even, going back to Industrial Revolution, we have the great Luddites to use as an example. Historically, people that pushed back on the technology change and didn't deal well with the change management. But I think it does make sense to me that's our default, but it's a narrative that is almost like an apology. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, we created another bubble. Like, okay, it's not unreal. It's just, it's perhaps growing faster than you want, but yeah, that resonates, I think. And, I know you guys you host a podcast, Inference Time Tactics podcast, and you guys go really deep on the infrastructure side of this, chips, accelerators, data center design. I mean, from those conversations, what are you seeing about how the physical infrastructure layer is, adapting to support this shift towards a multi-model, sizing the model to the task kind of approach to things?
Well, I think, older GPUs become useful. Other alternatives become useful. So when you think about our AI industrial capacity in America and competing globally, we don't just need to build more data centers and advance the chips and have more of them or have trade restrictions and things like that. I mean, scale is important. We still need to push the frontier, absolutely.
Sure.
But we even explored this with a few people on our podcast, which you can find, Neurometric Inference Time Tactics, that the GPUs that we have in existing data centers are underutilized. So we're not even close to maximum efficiency on the capacity we already have built. So we have to have a multi-pronged approach. We need to both scale our capacity and build more data centers, and we need to make the ones that we already have more efficient, and we need a more robust reseller market and refurbishing and reusing compute memory in a way that's useful. And when you think about alternatives and small language models and where the market's going to go next will be edge and compute, some compute pushed to the edge. It's going to be really interesting. So we're very early in the innings, and you don't see much talk at all in the media or in the narrative about AI efficiency. But we're just starting to have that conversation in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to hear some startups talk about it. I'm starting to hear some people kind of bandy around these different ideas around it, and some of that perhaps is the reaction to, oh, we don't have enough capacity, but I it seems to me that it does lead us down a path where the innovation needs to kick in, that says we can do this with less resources. We have a more efficient way to deal with it. And the sizing the model to the problem seems like a really logical one in my mind, that does help us, with the resourcing. It also kind of opens up tech in a way too, right? Because you mentioned that some older chips, some older approaches work better in that kind of monitored world where we are focused around efficiency.
Yeah, and better is an optimization problem. Like, so it's not just always accuracy on everything or cost. It may be a latency issue you're solving for, or a privacy issue, or a compliance issue you're solving for, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point too. That efficiency isn't always, that specific to the fact that technology simply won't operate that way. It could simply be the way you operate, right? I mean, that's a choice, and the way you've approached this by only using frontier models for problems that could be solved by smaller models, that in effect is you could contribute into the problem, not solving it, right?
Yeah, you may not want to give a corporation or an open source tool that can run rampant, that's connected to the internet. Maybe you don't want to give this system levels access to all of your data, right? Maybe there's some things you want processed on your phone or device, and then only certain things escalated to solve a problem, or maybe there are compliance issues related to what objectives you need to achieve, or latency issues, right? Or maybe maybe you have AI enabled drones or something in the field, and you need to process intelligence on device when communications are lost, right? So there are all various reasons that you're going to need this kind of orchestration, and that intelligence is going to be in the cloud, on the edge, on-prem, and that you have to synthesize all of that.
I mean, there are a lot of different ways to solve a problem, I think, is a really good point, right? And just because one approach has been popular doesn't mean it's the right approach. So taking a step back sometimes really does give you a different perspective on the whole problem.
There's no one size fits all. There's no one God model. The future is less like Mission Impossible if you're a movie fan, and more like Tron. That's just how I see it.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, even for analysts in my world, I've had this conversation a lot. Like I run a local model. Why do I run a local model? Well, I run a local model so I can air gap it, so I can have it do things that I don't want to violate an NDA over, but I still want to be able to summarize this presentation, or track these different progress against these different types of activities, and it's just things that I needed to protect. I thought I'll run a local model to do that, but in fact, what I've seen is that's a lot more efficient for certain types of tasks, and even when it's connected, it's still it provides value in what I do by coming to that realization. So I think it's a learning that hopefully businesses are starting to experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you've been on both sides of the VC table, founder raising capital, then a venture capital raising funds, and working with different startups. How does that dual perspective really shape the way you think about the business model for Neurometric? And maybe even more broadly, how do you see the economics of AI infrastructure evolving as the market moves from scale everything to more of an efficiency approach?
think some of that came out in how I answer these questions, right? Reasoning through things in a macro way. So often, many VCs, many of the best ones that I admire, are thesis driven, right? And asking these questions about the adjacent possible, and then you roll up your sleeve and you get your hands dirty building a thing and trying. And so, how did that land to Neurometric? It was when I met Rob. We were quick friends going to Knicks games and both serial entrepreneurs. And started his career ASIC chip designer, and then built 4 companies and had some exits, one 9-figure exit. And he's been investing in AI companies as an angel and then a VC for years. And so we were talking about this thesis, and he had this name, Neurometric, but we were talking about a bunch of different opportunities. And this was more organic, that when he was introducing me to inference time algorithms, that I just became obsessed in thinking through this. And we were going back and forth. And he's like, dude, you're like doing the job. Why don't you join as a co-founder and COO? So often you can come to really interesting places if you ask interesting questions and follow your curiosity, and don't stop there. Just like roll up your sleeve and try to do something and create.
Yeah. I mean, curiosity, that's a sort of a superpower to some people, I think, too, right? I mean, why did you do what you did? It's just because I'm inherently curious about everything, and that's not a bad thing, I think. Yeah. If I'm a business leader listening right now, and I'm running most of my AI on a single frontier model, which is, I'd say, the most common approach right now, anyway, and I'm starting to feel cost pressure, which again I think is very common right now. What should they do? What's the first step they should take? How should they, what metrics are important here? What should they be measuring, evaluating, so that they could make this decision that, multi-model makes a lot more sense for me? Or do you think it's universal? I mean, is it in general, should all companies be looking at sizing the model to the task all the time?
Yeah, I mean, if you are going from spending, $1,000 to $10,000 a month and 100, I've got one simple piece of advice. You should email Cooper@neurometric.ai, and I would love to help you cut your inference bill by 80 or 90%.
Your inbox is going to blow up, I think.
And all jokes aside, if you're a prosumer Vibe developer, you can just try one of our SLMs from the marketplace. Go to our website. If you've got an OpenClaw instance, it's just 2 lines of code. You just log in Neurometric. We'll give you an API key, and you can do that. We're not trying to replace your if you're using Claude or OpenAI's API, you just would set fallbacks for advanced reasoning, and that's it. And so just start to send some of your tasks to smaller language models, and we can host them for you. And if you don't want to go through the process of figuring out how to distill a small language model yourself for the task, and we can do custom builds as well. We can create a custom small language model pack for you that works.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I think we're seeing proof of concept all over the place, but, as a part of that, evaluate size of the model to the problem. I feel like that should just be a basic part of all the proof of concept that you're working through, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so that's all the time we have today, but really interesting conversation. I feel like this is an area that's going to get a lot more attention this year as more and more companies start to realize that, sizing things and thinking things through in a more optimized kind of framework is really important to be successful. But before I let you go, one thing I always like to ask at the end of the episode is, can you recommend somebody, thought leader, an author, podcaster, somebody that you think the audience would really learn from and enjoy if they followed them?
Yeah, absolutely. I've already shamelessly plugged Neurometrics, Substack,
Yep. Hey,
Rob May. I'd say, Rob May, our CEO. But I'd say Afshin takes Afshin Afshar, who I mentioned earlier, the founder of Pilot Wave, working with him on some M&A, right? Bringing this technology into the real economy. And Afshin's really interesting because he started his career. He got an MD, PhD at Stanford. So he's a medical doctor and has a PhD in machine learning and AI. And then he was MD Goldman, Chief Data Science Officer at JP Morgan, reporting to Jamie Dimon, and then Chief AI Officer at Cerberus, the huge private equity firm. So he was the first Chief AI Officer in Wall Street history. And then now he's doing it on his own. And he's the best kept secret. And he's starting to do more content. So I'd say follow him too. So that would be at SNAFF on X.com. Rob is at Rob May at X.com. And I'm at Cooper_NYC_. So I'd say like you're going to get different angles from those, the macro lens, the technical lens, builder lens, and AI, and you're going to get the AI in the real economy driving value in lower middle market companies. So that's a good set of things.
No, very good recommendations. I appreciate that, and I know the audience will check it out for sure. Well, Calvin, thanks so much for joining today. Really interesting conversation, and I feel like the audience certainly got a lot of value out of that. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.